Morning and good evening to UK. Welcome to Bitcoin Treasuries World number 56 for a smarter Webley Wednesday on a Monday. Why not? I do have to just show off my new favorite Bitcoin merch. If does that show all of it, Andrew?
Yeah, I can see it.
The Bitcoin logo with the British flag in it, or the Union Jack. Gorgeous. Thank you so much for that, Andrew, and thank you to your son for sending it over. Welcome to the show, and how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. It's been quite a intense period the last couple of weeks for us, and a week ago we were able to share the exciting news that we've been working on, and then since then we've published our prospectus that came out on Friday, and then this morning we announced our Bitcoin Treasuries unconference that we're doing, which we're quite excited about as well. So it's been busy, and I'm hoping that we're at the start of a very, very busy period for the company and Bitcoin Treasuries in general.
I think we could be, and I couldn't agree more. It's busy and definitely exciting. It does seem that sentiment is coming back a little bit. So all of us shareholders have been excited about the future London Stock Exchange uplisting, and then you announced it Monday that this application is in. Can you help us understand? You have applied, and what is? How sure are we that you will now uplist in February? Is it February 3 or 4, 3rd or 4th, and what does it look like for you guys?
So probably the best way to answer that is to talk about the process, because it's quite an interesting process if you've never been on that process. So if you're a company that may be listed already on a different venue like ourselves, or not listed at all, you can decide that you want to list your business on the London Stock Exchange, and then start the process. There's certain eligibility that you need to comply with. So there's a minimum value of the business, which crudely speaking is the market cap. And then of course there's costs for this. There's an awful lot of work that goes into this process. It takes many months. And so, because of those two things, it's only suited to businesses of a certain size. So because we are a quoted company on Aquis today, there's things that you can say and things that you can't say. And even if you're a private business, you shouldn't really announce certain things until a certain point in the process. With the advice of our advisors, we decided that we wouldn't say anything other than that it was an aspirational goal of ours, knowing that, of course, we were working on this process. And then you get to a certain point at which you've got enough confidence, and your advisors have got enough confidence, that you can tell the market about it, which is exactly what we did, a week ago. When we also called a general meeting to allow us to manage the time scales around leaving one market and joining another market, which is exactly what we did. And then after that, you get approval, all being well, from the FCA, which is our regulator, of your prospectus, which is a legal document, and I'm ever so proud of that document. Anyone can have a look at it from our website, and that sets out what you do as a business, what you want to do as a business, your financial position, corporate governance, all of these things, and that gets published. And then there's a few more things that happen, as that timetable unfolds. And if you look at the timetable in the prospectus, it says that our first day of trading, all being well, on the London Stock Exchange will be Tuesday the 3rd of February, which is 2.5 weeks, I think, from where we are. Two weeks actually, maybe something like that. And then you get to that point. You have what's called an opening ceremony, which is where We're still trying to work out the numbers that we're allowed actually on that. We're hopefully we'll have that tomorrow. You invite some people. It's not quite as large a number as I thought, but as I say, I'm still trying to work that out. And that you open the stock market, same sort of thing as happens with the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange, just a
like
nice
ringing the bell kind of thing, and you have the whole crew there.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's what we're working on. The people that aren't in the UK, Tyler and Jesse, they booked their flights. Laura, who's part of the team, she's sorting out the travel for the rest of us later this week. So yeah, all systems go, all being well. Until something's done, it's never done though. I think everyone needs to be mindful of that. But getting to the point at which you've got a FCA approved prospectus which is published is a significant milestone, and it's great for us because we've been very, very limited on what we're able to say. We've only knowing that some weeks we've worked incredible hours all day every day, trying to get everything in the position that's possible, because rightly so, from the advisors and the FCA, everything is looked at in incredible detail. So it's nice to be able to say that, and to share that news with ultimately the owners of the business, i.e. our shareholders.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what I noticed you said, it is FSA approved, so it's I guess it's kind of limited what could get in the way of this happening. And you're saying you're already booking flights, and right, although nothing is guaranteed, I should say, which is correct, and it's like that with everything.
The one thing that I do think is great is if you look at our prospectus, you can see that if you look at the definitions, which is at the back of the document, we've been allowed to say things like Bitcoin yield, MNAV, these things that when we listed on Aquis, we weren't allowed to say. So, for the wider Bitcoin community, both in the UK and globally, we've done a very good thing with this, in my opinion, in terms of trying to push things forward a little bit. And it's really cool that we've been able to take things to a more advanced level than we were able to do 9-10 months ago, whenever the Aquis IPO was. And I don't see that changing. As time goes on and things get more accepted, the model can evolve and grow. Institutions become more receptive over this type of company, i.e. an operating business with a Bitcoin treasury strategy. And I think it's just positive for the world in general. But clearly I'm pretty biased because I'm very supportive of the Bitcoin treasury scene.
Me too. Absolutely. Hashtag me too. Yeah. And you mentioned also, so it obviously, well, by the way, no. So the thing you mentioned, that the fact that you can now use words like BTC yield, etc. I was listening in on your conversation with James last Wednesday, and heard you saying that as well. And definitely that's positive for treasuries. It's positive for Bitcoin. And what's good for Bitcoin is good for humanity. So it's all steps in the right direction that we want to go. You did mention that obviously this is costly to list on the primary number one stock exchange in the country. And I noticed you were able to run the ATM, or maybe that's not the exact legal or technical term for you guys, but people know what it means, selling shares at a premium and raise funds advantageously compared to the balance sheet. So you did that, and I noticed that. So now your yield for Q1, as we just started in January, became a little bit negative, and that's obviously because you've raised now pounds that you have sitting. And is that as a payment for the uplisting, or is it to create a buffer? Because we also know early December you got the vote approval that you can now buy back shares. Is it for a buffer in a situation like that? If MNAV goes low, then you can buy it up, and that's accretable. or what is the use you intend for the funds you raised?
Yeah, so there's two things to say there. With the disclaimer that we can only talk around what's in the prospectus and publicly available information. Now, the first thing to say is, in our prospectus, you can see the cost of our uplisting is approximately £1.5 million. On one hand, that's a lot of money. On the other hand, if you look at the movement that we've had in our share price since we announced that news, it's created a lot of value. What I'd urge people to do is to have a look at other London Stock Exchange prospectuses, and see. So there was a company that listed towards the end of last year called Princess Food. I looked in their prospectus; their listing fees were, I think, they're £11.5 million. So what I'd like people to understand is that clearly, when you're a public company, there's certain costs, but we run a very, very tight ship, and I always push for the hardest deal possible. Everyone that knows me in this space will know that we always drive quite a hard bargain, and I'm delighted. I haven't got any data that says that we're the cheapest admission to the main market or anything like that, but be quite surprised if there's that many others that are anything like what we've paid. So that's the first thing to say, and that's public information that's available in the prospectus. The second one, which is more a direct answer of your question, is that we announced, so when the prospectus was being finalized, we needed to ask the ATM operator for the precise number of shares that had been sold, which is why there was an update midweek, as opposed to a Monday, which is as we intend to announce moving forward. And you're right that the proceeds of that was £1.7 million. And because we then added those shares into our analytics to give a meaningful representation of the fully diluted shares at this precise moment in time, but then we held the cash in the business, or hold the cash in the business, pending what we're going to do with it, it does create a slight negative yield, less than 1% in the current quarter to date. So what I'd say to everyone is, we're trying to build the business for the medium to long term, and we've got a range of options in front of us. Buying Bitcoin, holding cash, holding more cash than we've held in the past, using some of it towards the uplisting costs. People can see the cash based on the numbers that are in the document anyway, and obviously there's been raises after that point. So I can't give you a straight answer on that, as much as I'd love you to. But I'm incredibly confident about what we're going to do in this quarter, this year, and for future years. I'm really proud of the record that we've had historically, but I'm not allowed to give you a really straight answer, because that might be giving you information before we release it to the market. So I would just say, watch this space, and we believe that we've got the right strategy for the short term, the medium term, and the long term. Clearly, all of our objectives is making the business as successful as it can be, and one of the metrics that we use for that is the Bitcoin yield, and we do look at it on a quarterly basis. So I'd be pretty disappointed if it was negative in a quarter ever. Not saying that technically it may be that it's negative for some quarters, but I'm certainly not planning on that.
Yeah, and by no means is that my expectations. It's as an investor, awesome to see that the stock is back above 1.1 MNAV. I think we're even closer to 1.2 now. Go ahead.
What's worth remembering as well is, so I don't know whether this is the same with other Bitcoin treasury companies, but with our company, what happens is we sell some shares, we get some cash, and at that point, you reduce the sats per share, Bitcoin yield, whichever metric you're using, because you've effectively increased the share count, and at that point you haven't bought Bitcoin with that, or used it for other purposes. And then when you buy Bitcoin, you don't necessarily create a positive yield, but you increase, in theory, the Bitcoin per share because those shares are already in the account. So there's always going to be, and you can see it if you look closely at our graph, you can see a moment and then it changes. So, what I can't tell you right now is whether you're talking like hours or a little bit longer, for that thing to happen. But, we've asked our shareholders for an awful lot of late, because clearly the price action until this year has been hard for everyone, and it's been very difficult not being able to say certain things. But if we can ask something else of our shareholders, it's to please understand that we are working almost every hour of every day to try and make the company a success. And there's not been that many things that we haven't delivered reasonably well historically. So, perhaps that delivery sort of record will continue, and that's certainly what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think, Andrew, that those of us who survived the Q4 bear market are very bullish on smarter web, medium and long term, and probably a lot of us, including myself, also short term with the MNAV at a place where it's actually positive to possible to yield now, and so things are looking very good, and we've had a great January so far, and very excited about obviously this uplisting. So
that's the awesome thing about sentiment and the model over a period of time, which people need to understand, is that in our opinion, what you'll have with Bitcoin treasury companies is that there'll be periods where they're not loved, and there's periods where they're loved, and there's periods where there'll be extreme fear, and there's periods where there'll be extreme happiness. So it's like a wave of sentiment which we believe corresponds to effectively MNAV, because when no one's interested, maybe they don't appreciate the longer term, and obviously this improves over time, the yield that you've managed to deliver, the Bitcoin yield. But it was our sort of working theory, if you like, that sentiment will improve. I've been investing for 25 years in Bitcoin for almost 10 years, and in any investment you get periods where everyone hates it or everyone loves it, and then the other metric that you need to understand around that is the ability of a company to raise capital. We've demonstrated to people that we can raise reasonable amounts of capital in a variety of different ways, whether that's smarter convert, placings, ATM, in the future other things perhaps, and you need to understand those two variables, so the ability of the company to raise capital, and then the sentiment side of things. And and that's why, in our opinion, we're getting into a very exciting time again now. And don't forget, with a Bitcoin treasury company, if you've got the ability to raise capital and sentiment improves further than where it is at the moment, so you go from this isn't a projection, like a 1.2 to a 1.4, 1.5, 1.6 MNAV, the accretive nature of that higher MNAV gets mega exciting. And that's really, really important. And then if you look at what we've been doing when things have been tough, is we with our sort of proposed move to the main market of the London Stock Exchange, we in theory there's a much greater access to capital, not only the active money but the passive money as well, that's indexes and things like that. So structurally we believe that we've got the right company with a decent balance sheet that's going to get stronger. So yeah, I couldn't be more excited about the future right now, and I'm really hoping that we're right, so that the shareholders that have stuck with us through the less good times can see that how we've structured the business is right, whilst there's never any guarantees.
You touched upon something which was actually my next question, Andrew, and that was the index buying. So Bitcoin basically just needs to go up somewhat, and while you being on the London Stock Exchange, that will be automatic, not political, but automatic inclusion in FTSE 250 eventually, with the growth of Bitcoin and a positive MNAV and yielding and everything. Eventually it becomes FTSE 100, and that's all passive index buying that obviously helps your situation, because that will be just buying shares, and that's one of the main drivers of buying more Bitcoin when you can sell those at a premium. But also, so my question is, will you already, if you have this MNAV, market cap that you have now, and you get uplisted in February, is that enough to be included in the small cap index, which is, so outside FTSE 250, but just like the general smaller companies in United Kingdom? So passive buying from that, is that something that could be triggered already from when you uplist?
Not from, but very, very shortly after, we believe. So the way it works in the UK for the main market is you've got the FTSE 100, and then you've got the FTSE 250, and you add the two together and you've got the FTSE 350. Underneath that, you've got the FTSE small cap, and then right at the bottom, you've got the FTSE micro cap. So that's the index structure, if you like. The FTSE all share is the FTSE 350 and the FTSE small cap added together. So in theory, a company the size of ours wouldn't quite be big enough for the FTSE 250, but we would be big enough for the FTSE small cap and the FTSE all share indexes. So that's sort of size. And then how do you get into these things? Well, it's a simple case of time. So I believe that these are quarterly reviews, next one being March. I believe that there's enough trading days between the 3rd of February and when the indexes next get reviewed to allow us to get into those two indices, i.e. the small cap and the all share, in March, end of March. So I don't know that for a fact. And then what I'm hoping is that we have a really, really good couple of months, and then we'll be big enough maybe to take our position in the FTSE 250, which would be great, because then that would be just over a year of the life as a public company, and to get into that sort of index then would be great. Going back to the subscription model that we've got, which a lot of people call an ATM facility, the reason why that is such a good facility, or one of the reasons, is that it scales brilliantly. So it scales fantastically well alongside the other capital strategies that you can use. So if you've got a stock that's liquid, now there was an article in a paper called The Times on Saturday in the UK, and I don't know the date range that they were talking about. I guess it's somewhere between a month and 3 months, but I genuinely don't know. It might be longer, but it doesn't matter because the date range is the same for everyone in that article. And they had the top 10 shares sold by retail investors and the top 10 shares bought by retail investors on both markets combined. And we were position 10 for the buys. We weren't in the sells. This was done by value, not number of shares. The next one above that was a company called Marks and Spencer's, which is a pretty big shop in the UK. And then you have things like, Rolls Royce and probably Lloyds Bank, and I don't know what the other ones were, but basically the 10 biggest stocks bought by retail investors over that time period. And so we've definitely got liquidity in our stock, which is great. So if you add all those variables together, size and liquidity, and then you overlay that with structure of a company in terms of its venue of listing, it's quite exciting.
It's very exciting, Andrew, and I'm becoming again more bullish when I'm talking with you. And there's a couple of different things that is coming to my mind that I'm writing down. One of them is, so there's a couple of different treasury companies in UK, as there are in many markets. I'm getting echo on myself. I don't know if is that in, I don't know if it's in Restream and it bothers no one, or if it's on your speaker or something. I hope it's not a problem for people. But
I can't hear any echo, so it's probably
perfect.
your end.
Yeah, I'll continue and try and ignore the voice of myself with a delay. Jesse has said earlier that it's for treasury companies, it's a winner takes most, which I absolutely agree with. The biggest having some advantages in accruing more Bitcoin and creating that yield. And now we're seeing you getting access to some indexes, which you will be the only treasury company having that further assistance, which I'm considering obviously making the stock more attractive, which should attract more buyers, which justifies a premium bigger maybe than others. That again also just means that the machine, in terms of creating yield, runs faster. So it's very bullish, I would say, for SWC. Also, I think we have to remember because now you mentioned the different indexes, and thank you for clarifying that. It just makes me more bullish. What the QQQ inclusion did for MSTR, I think it was one of the most bullish periods at the end of 24, Q4 2024, when we knew that strategy was going to be become part of QQQ. All that front running, all that buying did wonders for the stock. Combining that with, if we just all think back 3, 4, 5, 6 months, we do know that when our treasury company is smaller, then the yield numbers easily becomes a lot higher. So the value growth for the shareholders is higher. So your yield numbers were several 100% during the summer of last year. I think that's a good reason to be quite bullish for SWC in the coming period of time this year.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. The thing that you've got to remember is the reason why our numbers were so good last year is because we were so good at raising large amounts of capital. So you're right that if you're a small Bitcoin treasury company and you can raise increasingly large amounts of capital, you can generate one hell of a yield, which we did before and will, all being well, do again. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that there's lots of different models, and this is a great thing, So, I'm supportive of any company, private company, public company that wants to buy Bitcoin. And we've got our strategy that we've executed to date, and we'll continue to do that. And I hope we'll continue to do that well. But there's other companies out there that have got different models. And I'm loving seeing what some of these different companies are doing, which is one of the reasons why we've decided to put on our Bitcoin Treasury Unconference UK, because, we want to showcase what these different people can do in the UK and let them talk about their models, whatever they may be. So maybe generating operating profits at scale and deploying them into Bitcoin. And then that creates a yield with less dilution, perhaps. Or maybe, doing whatever they're doing, to do that. So, I think what I'd like to see this year, other than us basically smashing through the FTSE 250 en route to the FTSE 100, is I would like to see, lots of companies doing different things well. And there probably is a winner takes most, sort of thing that's happening, and that's okay. But then there's room for lots of other companies, as long as people are doing what they believe in and they're doing it well for the benefit of their shareholders, then, it's a very, very positive thing. And, I'm looking forward to seeing what lots of the other companies, in the UK and internationally, can do over the next few years. I'm so focused on Smarter Web because, obviously, it's my job, it's the company that I founded, and I absolutely love what we're doing and I believe in our strategy. But, just as we've all got different opinions in the world, there's loads of other things that people might be able to do with Bitcoin on their balance sheet, which could be really, really cool. And I think that's brilliant. It's good for Bitcoin, it's good for the UK capital markets, it's good for the world. And so I'd like to see more of that.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm getting in the chat that they are getting the feedback. I don't know if I'm on speaker at your computer, and I may not be. But I don't know if you can mute me when I talk, or maybe a better solution is just that I don't say too much, Andrew, and to hear you talk. So I'll try and limit my speaking. But I mean, to sum it up, personally very bullish on. Okay, the feedback is gone now. Did you mute yourself when I'm talking? Or okay, thank you, appreciate it. I think the people out there appreciate it as well. So I think 2026 does look like a very bullish year for SWC and other treasury companies. Sentiment seems to be coming back. What's left to discuss is the outlook of Bitcoin itself in 2026. I would claim that the 4-year cycle is still intact. It hasn't been broken yet. However, I also did a video last spring, I think, when Strategy announced the different prefs, where that if they get enough buy volume on those, that in itself will create such a buy pressure. And we're seeing it also now from Strive and also from Metaplanet, that in itself might remove a bear market year. It could just uphold the price, I think. And we're seeing a lot of volume on Stretch. And just recently, I think Strategy announced 15,000 Bitcoin bought in 1 week. So I think that is now so much, it looks positive for Bitcoin itself. But what's your thoughts on the cycle and potential bear market for Bitcoin and all this buying that is now happening based on prefs themselves?
So my opinion is that the 4-year cycle is probably a thing of the past, largely anyway. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that the scale of the buying from, well, I like to say Bitcoin treasury companies, but Strategy's been pretty much doing it for everyone for the last 3 months, because most Bitcoin treasury companies haven't been buying that much Bitcoin. But hopefully some of them starting very, very soon. So I think that sort of adoption side of things, I think, if we look back at the last couple of years, there's been a lot of talk about the institutionalization of Bitcoin, and clearly that's been happening. I think this year that will continue. I think the thing that sort of causes a bit of an issue with Bitcoin, which is natural as something becomes sort of more established, is the sort of the paper Bitcoin. And I don't mean the paper Bitcoin that sometimes people call Bitcoin treasury companies, but I mean the paper Bitcoin in terms of the people trying different option strategies against Bitcoin, to sort of squeeze out, a 1%, 2%, whatever a month. I'm not a big fan of those, but clearly it's just part of the market as it becomes bigger. Above all of that, though, I think that at the end of the day, if you zoom out a little bit and you look at, an increasing adoption of a fixed supply asset, I think providing the thesis of why people buy that asset is still true and growing, which it clearly is in the case of Bitcoin, then I think it's a fantastic asset to hold in our case, as a treasury asset, or in an individual's case to protect themselves from the debasement of the fiat currency. I'm not 100% sure, if I'm honest, why gold and silver have had such a good 12 months and Bitcoin hasn't had a better period alongside that. If we look back at history, you could make a case for, when that plateaus out, which it may or may not do, then that's when Bitcoin rips. But we're just going to have to wait and see. I'm personally, as much as it's, probably not the thing that people want to hear, I'm actually quite glad that Bitcoin recorded a very, very small down year last year, because I think that removes some of the narrative. Because if it hadn't recorded that, and let's say it closed up like 1% positive or something, I think that all year this year we'd have everyone saying that it's going to be a down year, So I'm quite glad about that, as much as it's not what everyone wants to hear. I would say also that if you look back at our company, clearly building a balance sheet on Bitcoin, If we look at last year and we think that, yes, there was a period where it was very, very tough on the share price. But if you look at the Bitcoin per share or any of those sorts of metrics, we achieved a lot in a year that wasn't great for Bitcoin. So let's assume that this year is a good year, which is what I believe it will be for Bitcoin. Then, things could get incredibly interesting for Bitcoin treasury companies. So, I'm pretty bullish about the near-term potential for our treasury assets. And clearly over the medium to long term, it's looking pretty good too.
I would agree, and I think in particular your situation now amongst the different treasury companies with this uplisting, which is likely to take place but not guaranteed, I would say probably very likely, then your situation in particular with the passive buying coming from the indexes, as we spoke about before, I think looks super bullish. Do you plan to now, we know strategy has created quite the cash buffer, like in the billions of the dollars. Meta Planet to some extent as well. There's others as well. I know Orange went public with a cash buffer. Is that something you're planning to build bit by bit, maybe going forward? Is that something you're thinking about?
Yeah, so we've always kept some cash in the business. So we're an operating business that creates a little bit of cash, and then also we hold some back. Clearly, our costs have gone up as we've become a public company, not just because of doing the uplisting, but as the team's grown out. People will see that we've recruited more non-executive directors. And I think people should want to have really good people in a company. Particularly as it gets bigger and bigger, to make sure that everything's being done, to the best possible way. It's a false economy not having the best people. In the UK, we have a saying where if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. But
I think that's global.
Yeah, probably is. We won't claim that as a UK saying then, so we don't upset anyone. But we clearly do have costs, and that's all clearly stated. And we've clearly kept enough cash. My personal opinion is that I believe maybe. So I've thought a lot about why did we trade at our worst, like a 0.7 mNAV. And the two things that could have been, in my opinion, is one is a lot of selling, obviously, alongside sentiment not being great with Bitcoin and Bitcoin treasury companies. But I do think that probably part of that was the market not thinking that we had a large enough cash position for the future, where I couldn't come out and say, look, we've got cash for X period of time. But I do think that if we could say to people, right, we've got cash for this period of time, which is different, to when we IPO'd, there was a lot of people having a go at me for deploying the cash too slowly. And I think a lot of those people, included some quite big names, have actually, U-turned and come around to my way of thinking. So yeah, when you're a public company and you've got costs, in the same way that if you're an individual and you store all your money in Bitcoin, clearly there is an advantage of having a little bit of cash for as an individual living and as a business surviving. The worst thing that you can do as an individual or as a public company is to sell your Bitcoin. And I don't think, I've not been worried about that as a business ourselves, but I think some people have been worried about that, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why we traded at that pretty ridiculous level towards the end of last year. So yeah, I would we don't need to have a cash buffer the size of Strategies, because clearly they've got a cash buffer for the dividends on the prefs. But I think I'm not 100% decided on what the size of that cash buffer should. We've been discussing it as a board and a team to try and make sure that we come up with the right number. But I think it's quite sensible, But you don't really want to hold cash for too long, because ultimately that cash is going to be devalued to whatever your favorite rate of inflation is. every single year, you know. So, but I think that we'll, with what we're doing, we'll get the right balance there, and I hope that that will be one of the things, in addition to a longer track record, that will show people in a future, you know, less positive stage, that, you know, that we're a safe place to stay invested, you know, notwithstanding for the fact that you'll always get volatility in a model like this.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned how you were trading at a very large discount in December, which I also noticed, and I did some, which I'm still, I guess, in the process of tax loss harvesting. So I quadrupled, I think, my SWC size right around MNAV 0.8, and it's great to see now that with the likely uplisting, and then as I'm learning from you now, we are learning it, likely index buying starting from March already. I guess that might be part of the reason that we're seeing the stock having performed really well lately, and it becomes that positive spiral where it's now trading at a premium, where running the ATM is technically possible and viable, which then further reinforces the stock performing well. And it just does seem like SWC, like Metaplanet, you could argue as well, for sure, is over the worst, and it seems that's behind us, and it seems like we're back in a territory where the machine is running for selling stock at a premium, and thereby accreting more Bitcoin for the existing shareholders. So I'm increasingly bullish for SWC, and looking forward to this year. I think it's going to be very interesting.
One of the great things that you've potentially got is that you'll always get people front running stuff in a market. So if you think about the potential catalysts on the horizon for us, you know, you've got the move to the main market, you know, all being well. Then you've got, you know, the smaller index inclusion, then you've got the larger index inclusion. You know, you've got all these things at different points in time. And then if you overlay that with the capital raising strategies that we've got, you can see that, you know, you create this sort of momentum. And then, you know, if we can be fortunate enough for Bitcoin to get that momentum alongside all of that, you know, i.e. where we store our treasury, you know, things can get very, very exciting very, very quickly. Because if you go back to the equity side of things, there'll be certain people that cannot buy at certain points. So there'll be index funds, for example, they cannot front run it. So you'll get other people front running it, push the price up, then the index people buy it. You know, obviously they buy it, some people sell out of it. But, you know, as long as it's sort of net, you know, positive in terms of, you know, more buying than selling, then you just create this sort of perpetual, you know, movement. And, you know, it's quite mind-blowing when you think about it too much. What I try and do, because obviously we talk about this, and, you know, going back to, you know, I don't know, the end of Q3, start of Q4, we were doing a lot of analysis on the indexes and thinking, right, what could this mean for us at these different points, and you know, all those sorts of things. And yeah, you know, it's pretty cool. But my job now is just to focus on every single day and just delivering the things that we need to deliver, and, you know, try and show our shareholders that, you know, there's a lot going on at the moment. And then hopefully over the next couple of weeks they can see some of these things come into action, and see that, you know, the machine never stopped. It's just the machine, you know, had a brief period where it was recharging its battery so it could go even quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first time I interviewed you last year, we spoke about proof of reserves, SWC potentially doing that. And you said that that's something you're evaluating. Is that something so we know Metaplanet is doing it, Strategy will not do it, Orange is doing it in Brazil. Have you come to any conclusion of if that's something you want to do, or is the jury still out on that?
Yeah, it's probably worth talking about the custody side of things alongside that. So we believe that the right thing for us to do is to custody our Bitcoin how we custody it, because self-custody for a Bitcoin treasury company is just not something that I want for our company. The risk to the people that work at the company is just not acceptable. You know, it's just not acceptable. So the custody side of things, you know, we put a lot of effort into having the right custodians with the right security in place, so that there is not points of weakness in the system which can be abused and you know, sort of jeopardize the safety of the people that work at the company. So that's that side of things. The second side of things, directly in response to your question, is the proof of reserves. So I'm more in the Michael Saylor camp. We have looked at it a couple of times because people ask us from time to time. You know, at the end of the day, you know, we've got we're an audited company that in the near future will be listed on the main market of the London Stock Exchange. There's pretty serious consequences if things aren't done properly. We use you know, the best custodians in the world. I think if we ever do proof of reserves, I think it would probably be something that would be linked into a service that's provided as part of the custody arrangements. And we have spoken to them about that a little bit to see whether or not we could go down that sort of route to get that solution. But, you know, I think at the end of the day, if you're going to buy our equity, you've got to trust the management, knowing that there's pretty serious consequences if things aren't done in the right way. So that's where we are at the moment. I'd never say never, and I think it's great that, just like I said about other Bitcoin treasury companies doing different strategies, I think it's great that companies do things in different ways. And then it's down to the investors to think, okay, well, you know, what do we want from a company? And, you know, it may be in the future that some investors would say that, you know, we wouldn't invest in Smarter Web because they don't do proof of reserves. But I think we're a long way away from that. I think the overall package of what we offer as an operating business with a Bitcoin treasury strategy is quite a good opportunity, in my opinion, for most investors. And, you know, maybe that is one thing that isn't perfect for some people, but you know, it is what it is at the moment. But, you know, like everything, we continuously look at everything.
Wonderful. It makes sense. It's pros and cons, and you got to do what's best for the company and the shareholders. What else is have I not been asking you about? Like we've spoken. No, actually, so do have that question. You've always been limited because you're a publicly traded company in terms of talking about which tools you're going to use or you're thinking about using in the future to create shareholder value through acquiring more Bitcoin per share. Is there anything though you can say now in terms of what technically could be possible or that you may not be doing, but is there anything you can say about potential tools that you haven't used yet for fundraising, or is it something we can only hear about once you do them?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about the options in the past, and people have seen that, you know, we did the first Bitcoin denominated convertible bond in the UK called Smart to Convert. That's not been as popular as I hoped, and people can see that because we did that one tranche of it. We have got discussions with some other people, and you may see some of those in the future. We've had a lot of stick the last few months because we're so keen on equity. You know, equity is a fantastic tool for a company if sentiment allows you to raise at a premium. I'm not very keen at all on debt. That's not to say that one day we might not have a little bit of debt, because we might need to do something like, you know, like a share buyback, for example. And it might be that we do that through debt, for example. But in the foreseeable future, things are going to continue as they are, because in my opinion, you know, we could probably get to 3 or 4 times the size of what we are using those strategies very, very well. we've done some analysis recently of the size of the UK equity markets, and they're vast. They're vast in terms of a global proportion. Clearly not as big as the States, but they are vast. London is an excellent place in terms of the equity markets, and we're still very, very small. So I think in a good market, you've got some options, and if you've got the ability to raise significant amounts of capital, which we believe we do, it's the best all round. It's personally, I don't think Bitcoin's a risky asset. I think it's one of the least risky assets. There is a school of thought that thinks it's risky. So let's forget about our opinions about Bitcoin for the moment. But in terms of a capital raising strategy, if you're doing that based on equity as opposed to debt, for example, and you can scale because you can raise equity, then it doesn't really get much better than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that is a phenomenal tool, and has been, and it was the main driver of yield. Let's not forget that last year for treasury companies. And on that note, as I'm seeing on your website right now, MNAV says 1.21. Is that the case, or I'm looking at USD, but I believe it should be calculated over. You had an open day in the market today, which we don't have in US because of Martin Luther King Day, I believe it is. But is that correct now? That's the MNAV ballpark you're at?
Yeah. So the share price on our website is the share price as it's traded in the UK. So when people view the analytics in euros or pounds or dollars, we just convert the data. So the share price is accurate. It's the share price as of London close, 2 hours ago, whenever that was. The US is closed, as you say. So yeah, it's accurate, 1.21. Now,
we like it
historically. I personally, think that at that price, it's an absolute bargain. If you look at our historic, progress as a business, I think when it got to below a 1 MNAV, I found that very tough myself. And I thought that the share price was a bit ludicrous. It was almost priced that we were never going to do anything again, which, anyone that's, got to know me through these interviews or ever spoken to me knows that, I will not rest. So, that was never going to happen. So yeah, it's a start. I'll be happier, if or when it gets higher. And as I said earlier, when you get to a more reasonable MNAV, then the equity markets become absolutely awesome in terms of accretive capital raising.
And it doesn't even look like that's where we're going. It's literally where we're going with a positive movement lately. And I think, we are back at least the beginning of the whole flywheel running again. It is like you raised money already last week, and the share price is even more advantageous for doing that with a higher premium. So it looks like we're back, and I think that is part of why the sentiment now, it's the worst is behind us, and the machine is running again. And with the index buying from LSE listing coming up, I think there's plenty of reasons to be quite bullish on seeing this whole thing running again. And again, I'm happy that you have 2,664 Bitcoin and not 500,000, because it will have a probably relatively higher impact, and it's going to be amazing to see smarter web company grow into this potential and start taking advantage of that on the London Stock Exchange. Very excited.
You've got to remember as well, yes, we're the biggest Bitcoin treasury company in the UK, I believe, but we're still tiny. There's so much that we can do to grow. There's people there that we need to overtake. On the global scale. That they're in the near-term sights. But we're still tiny in relative to where we want to be. So yeah, we're pretty pleased with how it's gone so far. But this is all about making this year count, and I believe that we're, you know, at the start of that second wave, and let's see whether it's as exciting as the first wave for our shareholders. I think that, you know, this year is going to be, you know, incredibly you know, good in terms of the company growing its balance sheet and, you know, doing a whole host of different things. So you know, there's never any guarantees, but, you know, we're still very, very small.
Absolutely. And it's crazy to think that just about a month ago, you could be buying SWC share for about 31% discount to the Bitcoin you held. And now the machine is running. Very, very exciting. So we're almost up on the hour, but Andrew, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Which questions haven't I asked you that if there's something that you do want to share with everyone, I do want to give you an opportunity to touch upon something that I didn't ask you about regarding SWC, the uplisting, the future, all of this.
Yeah, I think you've covered the main ones. You know, a lot of people are interested in the process, which I think we've covered quite well. A lot of people are interested in, you know, the capital strategies in the short term and what they mean. You know, a lot of people are interested in when we're going to be buying Bitcoin again, you know, and all of those sorts of things. So I'm hoping that most people found this chat, you know, relatively interesting. And I'm pretty confident that we've probably covered most of the main things that people want to hear about. But you know, where are we now? So Monday the 19th. So you know, let's do one of these again in the next couple of weeks, and then maybe we can, you know, talk about some other things that have happened in the company, perhaps.
That sounds amazing. I will love to talk to you about the whole the actual main business. The last couple of months, I've been helping a friend that has a company that builds websites, not at all at the scale that you did. And I did have a couple of decades ago experiences working a commercial manager in a company which is more similar to what you're doing, one.com, which is, you know, standardized module websites. And I've got a lot of ideas from this last stint where I have stepped back into advisor only role that I think potentially could be useful for SWC. What I'm seeing is, you know, apart from building website, it could be a potentially quite profitable next step to offer some of the services around it, like, you know, Google search ads, YouTube video advertising, social media advertising, and because clients wanting a website often also wants it marketed, and if you do things right, you can actually be you can generate a lot of value there for clients, and that when you can generate value, that comes back. So I know something is cooking there, and excited to hear because there's a big potential for Smarter Web Company on the main business itself, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. So you know, as an operating business, you know, we are pretty excited about the future. We'll have to see whether that one sort of takes the shape that we believe it will. But you're right. You know, the core website business, you know, the marketing extras that, you know, some people take, you know, the margins in those are pretty healthy. You know, and the retention's quite good, providing you're good at it. You know, and that's the holy grail really of this sort of, you know, business, where you can sell a service that's sticky, and it can be sticky, you know, through either technology or through results, you know, the service. So yeah, we're pretty encouraged. You know, I think if you want it to be negative about it, you know, in the first 9 months, then, you know, we've done our best to progress that. But, you know, we could have done more, just like we could have done more with everything, you know. You know, but, you know, we believe we've got a good plan for the future on that side of things. And, you know, I'm sure Alex is busy working away now, but if he was watching, you know, like, Alex has been key to all of that. And, you know, I'm very, very grateful for that, you know. But yeah, I can't really talk too much about our specific plans on that, because I'll get into a whole load of trouble.
And we don't want that, Andrew. That's the last thing we need right now. We need the uplisting, and we want the index buying and all of that. Very exciting. Well, Andrew, just thank you so much. I want to say for coming on here early after the announcement and allowing me to interview you and share all the good things coming at an early stage. Really appreciate that. It's always great to have you on, and excited to do another one in a couple of weeks when you have more that you can share. I'm definitely here for you. I'm, as you know, a shareholder and excited for what the future, even the near future, looks like for SWC, and very bullish for the year. And the 10-year plan as well, very bullish. What can I say? So thank you so much, Andrew. And again, really appreciate the merch here. That is now my favorite Bitcoin t-shirt with a British flag in the B. Love it. I love it.
And just to say that you can buy not only the tickets for our conference on our website, but you can also buy the Smarter Web merch. We've got a small amount left. So, you know, if you haven't got your Smarter Web merch, then now's as good a time as any to get some.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. We'll end it here. Thank you to everyone watching. It's always great to have, again, this, I think, amazing Smarter Web community of investors on X and watching in and having some fun in the chat as well. So thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you again, Andrew. Looking forward to do it in a couple of weeks again. It looks like a very interesting and bullish time to be following the company. So thank you, Andrew.